friends, this is part 3 of our series on prepotent dogs, line breeding and inbreeding. We're continuing the previous topic. This is part 3. Now, in this video we're going to discuss 3 strategies. The first strategy is the half-sibling program. And this is not line breeding, this is inbreeding. Now, inbreeding is very dangerous because you're doubling up on the positive traits, but you're also doubling up on the negative traits. So you're creating an animal which has the closest path to the ancestor you're inbreeding upon. Or people say inbreeding, line breeding, and they just use these words. But what does that mean? You're inbreeding on what? On what? That's the question you should ask yourself. So let's say I have a sire, which is a champion dog, and I want to get as close as possible to his blood or his influence 3 or 4 generations later. To do that, I need a high percentage of his genes in my offspring. Now, the more I concentrate his genes, the smaller my gene pool becomes. The smaller my gene pool becomes, the less heterozygosity I have. In other words, the less variability I have. And therefore I have smaller litter sizes. I might even have an infertile dog, which even though it can't make babies if it's a male, for example, or can't make babies if it's a female, it's infertile. You might have cleft palates. You might have diseases. So inbreeding is very dangerous. This is the most dangerous strategy, but it's also the quickest strategy between the offspring and the initial sire. In other words, the shortest distance between 2 lines is a straight line. This strategy creates the shortest distance between here and here, but it's also the one which includes the highest degree of risk. So, how does this strategy work? People asked me in the comments in my previous video how such a strategy works. Well, you will create the same sire to 3 different females. Female 1, I'm going to call it female A, female B, and female C. You're going to create a large number of offspring as a result of this breeding. She will have a son of female A. I'm going to write son of female A will be just called son A. Daughter of female A, I'm going to put daughter of female A. Son of female B. Daughter of female B. Son of female C. Daughter of female C. Now this is the F1 generation. In the F2 generation, I'm going to take the son of female A and pair him with the daughter of female B. Now what do they both have? They have the same sire. So they have 50% of him. So when you breed into each other, what are you accentuating? Their grandfather, right? So this will be A and B. Who is common? The sire. The next generation will be son B with daughter C. This combination will be B and C. And of course the third combination is son C with daughter A. So I have A plus B, A plus C, B plus C, if I didn't make any mistakes. That's how that works. So now these are half siblings bred from half siblings. What do they have in common? They have a high percentage of the blood of this dog. So the different moms introduce heterozygosity because they're different bloodlines. They're not sisters, they're totally unrelated. They carry that unrelated blood into the next set of kids. And then the next set of kids reduces the blood of the female but increases the blood of the common male. So this is how it's done. This is how to create what is known as a prepotent dog. A prepotent dog, by definition, is an inbred or line-bred dog. What does that mean? Let's say I have a famous stud dog that is a world champion. Let's take Secretariat, which is a famous racehorse. And I breed him, or he's dead, but in the past, let's say, we bred him to females which are not related to him. He was not prepotent, meaning that the quality of the female had more to do with the quality of the racing ability of the offspring, of the foal, than the father did. So if he was bred to a champion female, which was excellent, which was related to him, the foal would become greater chance having racing ability. If he was bred to a female horse which was not related to him in any way, even though he's a superior racehorse and the mother was a superior racehorse, the offspring were just average. Most animal breeding skews toward the average. In other words, you could take a champion German Shepherd and a champion female German Shepherd, and they only produce average pups because genetics skews toward the average. That's how breeding works. So every time Secretariat was bred to a cousin or a second cousin or a first cousin by multiple degrees, in other words, through multiple lines of ancestry, the outcome was usually very successful. And if he was mated to an unrelated horse, the outcome was not very successful. So even you breed a champion to a champion, will you get a champion? Logically, you should, right? But in reality, that's not how genetics works. That is why you inbreed or line breed. You're trying to concentrate the genes of the champion so that this will have a high percentage of his blood and therefore have a high chance of success. So a prepotent animal has a high percentage of the blood of the ancestor you're concentrating upon, such that when bred in the next generation, there's a higher likelihood, there's no guarantees, but there's a higher likelihood of success. Now, which animals here will you combine? Will you combine any son or daughter with any son or daughter? I mean, this is just one son and one daughter. The odds are this litter was 9 pups, this could have been 12 pups, this could have been 11 pups. So there's a lot of sons and daughters here. You have an overproduction of offspring, right? So the ones I've paired are the ones which were the best workers. They're not just any son or daughter out of these combinations with these females, but they were the best sons and daughters from each female. So there is genetic selection, but there's also natural selection or man-made selection. In other words, you selected by testing the ability of the animal to do either bite work, or if it's a race, let's say it's a greyhound, how fast it runs, whatever your criteria is. Let's say you're breeding greyhounds where the degree of speed matters, right? Well, you didn't breed just any son or daughter from these combinations out of all the pups in the litter. You raised them until they're about a year and a half. You saw how they behave, and the ones which were not that fast were sold off, and the fastest ones are the ones you kept and then bred to each other. So there is inbreeding involved, but there's also selection involved. It's not just any animals which were bred. So I just wanted to add that to the equation here. Okay, now that we've covered that, we're going to go less intense, and we're going to go through the second method called the first cousin program. And of course, the third method, which will be our final video, will be the uncle to niece program, which will be the final video. So let's cover the first cousin program. How does the first cousin program work? Well, you have a male, we're going to call it S for sire, who is bred to two different females, female A and female B. Okay? He's common to both females. This female is bred, well, I'm going to call it sire A and sire B. Okay? They produce a puppy, which is, let's say, a male. They produce a daughter, which is a female. Now, this puppy is a grandson of the sire, not a son of the sire. So this is not, in the first generation you would have bred the half-siblings. In this generation you're going to breed the grandkids of the common male, not the kids of the common male. So this will be first cousins, because they have a common grandpapa, right? So this is not their common father, but their common grandfather. 1, 2, 3. 3 generations back. And this is 3, 3. In other words, 1, 2, 3 on the male line, 1, 2, 3 on the female line. So this is a first cousin program, right? Not a half-sibling program. You will then mate these two half-siblings, these first cousins together, to produce a female offspring, which I'm going to draw as a square. I'm drawing males as a circle and females as a square. Now, how would this work to create prepotency? Well, first of all, before we talk about prepotency, what is the advantage of the first cousin program over the half-sibling program? The advantage is, because the common ancestor is a grandfather versus a father, every time you step a generation back in time, you're halving the coefficient of relationship. So it goes down from 50% of his genes to only 25% of his genes. And if you go back further in time, which will not create prepotency, but let's say it went back further in time, it will be 12.5%. So 1 generation back, 2 generations back, 3 generations back, every time you step back in time, you're reducing the contribution of the common ancestor by 50%. So had these been half-siblings, his ancestry would be 50%. But he's a grandfather, his contribution is only 25%. Again, I'm talking about coefficient of relationship, not coefficient of inbreeding, just to keep it straight. Now, in order for this program to succeed, you would need to have this sire bred to 2 other females, female C and female D. They produce offspring which are bred to each other. I'm not drawing it neatly, but I think you get the idea. And then this cousin from this female line and this cousin from this female line, common grandfather mind you, are bred to each other, so that this becomes 3, 3, 3, 3, and the common combined answer is 3, 3, 3, comma. In other words, the number on the left is the sire, the number on the right is the dam. So it's twice grandfather on the mother and twice grandfather on the father. That's typically not done. You typically see 3, 4 or 5, 3. It's not done this precisely because people are not only looking to create a line in breeding dogs, they're looking to create the best dogs without this being their focus, because they're no longer developing the breed, they're just trying to keep some amount of terrific ancestors in the dog, not a lot because we're not at the point of time 150 years ago, we're now in the present. So this is how the first cousin program works. This program is not very effective at creating a prepotent dog, because although it maintains a very high amount of diversity, it is not strong enough to create prepotency in the animal, because there are too many paths to the common ancestor that it's hard to create a prepotent animal. So in human populations, first cousin marriage is common. But if you have a lot of first cousin marriage, and then the product of first cousin marriage maintains another first cousin marriage, multiple generations of first cousin marriages eventually leads to very bad results. So in the first pass, first cousin marriage is not going to lead to a bad result. But if you keep doing it and not introducing outcrossing, in other words, fresh blood, you're not reshuffling the genetic deck, and you're introducing problems. The third program, which is the most efficient program, is the uncle to niece program. This is somewhere between line breeding and inbreeding. I would call it line breeding. It's written as 2-3 for uncle to niece, and it's written 3-2 as aunt to nephew. Now, so the male, remember the left is the male. So the male, the father of this dog is the grandfather of this dog. In the case of 3-2, the grandfather of the male is the father of the female. There was a famous German Shepherd breeder which developed the Longworth kennel of German Shepherds, and I believe they produced 90 champions in only 12 years or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers. And this gentleman was called Lloyd Brackett, if I remember the spelling correctly. And he created what's called the bracket formula. This formula is essentially one of these two programs. He writes the following, and I'm going to explain it and then I'm going to draw it. Let the sire of the sire be the grandsire of the dam. This is the golden rule known as Brackett's formula. Okay? The first version of the formula says, let the sire of the sire be the grandsire of the dam on the mother's side. The X chromosome and the mitochondria of the X chromosome carries more genetic payload than the Y chromosome from the male. So certain genes are sex-linked genes. In other words, some things pass to the mitochondrial line of the female, and some things pass to the mitochondrial line of the male. In my opinion, the female is more important than the male in dog breeding. A lot of people concentrate on the male, and a lot of line breeding is done on the male line. But it's the female which contributes to the puppies more directly. First of all, as the mother, she gives them the initial attention and love that they deserve, and she sets the tone for their development. Also, genetically speaking, the X chromosome carries more payload, and there are a lot of sex-linked characteristics. So not all genes are equally passed. Some genes are sex-linked and some are not. So the male basically contributes his genetic material to the puppies, but then he has no role in raising them. Unlike in wolves, where the father participates in raising the pups and regurgitates food for them, in dogs, the male just contributes his genetic material, but really the mother is who cares for the pups. And from a genetic contribution point of view, I feel that the female has a greater role than the male, in my opinion. Having done this, I see that's really true. So the way this formula reads is, let the sire of the sire be the grandsire of the dam on the mother's side. That's 3-2. The other ways, if you can't get that, then he says, let the sire of the sire be the grandsire of the dam on the father's side. That's 2-3. And of course, the second worst way to do it is half-siblings, which he also occasionally did if necessary. Now, all these formulas matter nothing if you don't selection test the dogs. For example, you could have dogs which is following this formula, but let's say one dog has an overshot bite, or an undersized jaw, or an overbite, or you have crooked hocks, or you have a dog which is fearful, and that dog, fear biting is genetic, it shouldn't be bred. In other words, this is a guide from a genotype point of view, but the phenotype and the behavior dictates what you breed or don't breed. How does this look in breeding dogs? And I'm going to wrap this video up in a few minutes. I wanted to show it to you. Let's say you have a dog. We're going to call him Yukon. And he has a son named Carl. And he has a son named Born. Like, you know, the Born identity. Forgive my lousy handwriting. Now, these are two male half-brothers, right? These are what? These are half-brothers. You pair Carl up with a female named Bubbles, and they produce a female named Bika. Now remember, I'm using a square to show a female and a circle to show a male. Okay. You pair Born up with a female named we're gonna leave Born by himself for a second. Now, Yukon was bred to a female, we're gonna say female 1, to produce Carl, and he was bred with female 2, let's say Frenzy's her name, to produce Born. So, same father, two different mothers produce Carl and Born, but one common father. Carl and Born are half-brothers. If I breed Bika to Born, what does that look like? Well, Yukon is the common ancestor, right? He's common to Carl and Born, right? Now, so if I breed Yukon, this is 1 generation, 2 generations, 3 generations. 1, 2, 3. 3 generations back on the female, right? 1, 2, 3, right? But Born is 2 generations away. 1, 2, 1, 2. So this becomes 3, 2. 3 generations back to the same grandfather on the female, Bika, but 2 generations back on the male. This will produce a dog whose COR, or coefficient of relationship, not to be confused